So today we're going to talk about the pattern of a 360-degree breath and the importance of your breath and diaphragm in core strength, control, and kind of motor coordination in general in that area. So 360 breath, when I say 360, I'm talking about the ability to breathe into the diaphragm, but not only the diaphragm, but also expanding out into the rib cage and back into the back. So we're going to kind of review a way to find a place to be able to meet all of those requirements and then put it all together at the end. So a big importance of the diaphragm is primarily to thinking of it as a muscle. Sometimes we often, I think, just feel like it's sort of like an air sac and a place that moves when the lungs fill and empty, right? It's an actual muscle that helps us inspire and expire, but it ties into our neurologic system as well. So kind of helps to settle the nervous system when it's expanded and relaxed. And it's one of the easiest and most accessible ways into that stress response. So that like fight or flight place that we tend to go when we get really nervous or really stressed about something. You know, people always say like, take a deep breath. And this is part of why. But if we're breathing into our shoulders and scalenes and here, one, we're not using our full lung capacity. And two, that can oftentimes create more of a stress response to breathe and fill up top rather than to breathe and relax our system when we use the diaphragm. So for today's purposes though, it's really about finding the core and the deep pieces of the core and being able to access those muscles. So the diaphragm lies right underneath our rib cage here. So when we look at our core musculature, we're built in layers, right? So the deepest layer, the layer that kind of forms that corset type thing around our bodies is called the transverse abdominis or a TVA. So those muscles run from the top of the pubic bone and they come up through the rib cage, come down and around, and then tie into the posterior side of the pelvis, both fascially through some of the larger back muscles, but also tie into our multifidus, which are some of the big spine, or they're small, but a big stabilizer in the spine for purposes of being able to do rotation and contralateral or opposing like right arm, left leg type of movements and stabilize throughout our day, because most of the time we're in a contralateral pattern, just as walking, right? You take a step with your left, the right arm is swinging forward, and we're consistently in this pattern, and the multifidus controls a big piece of that. So looking at the diaphragm and how an exhalation can really tie into the transverse abdominis. So our core muscles, sometimes we just think of as a set of abs, right? When people say improve your core, work on your strength, right? We go to sit-ups and crunches and planks, right? And sometimes those things are not appropriate for where strength and fitness wise we are today. So starting at the base, preparing your neurologic system a little bit better so that those muscles are more readily available to be used for more dynamic movements. So core isn't just our front side, it's not just our abdomen, right? So like I said, we have layers. The TVA come in here and tie back into the obliques in through this way, tie into the hips here, and then on our back side, the multifidus forms the back of that, but then also on the bottom side of this canister made is our pelvic floor. So pelvic floor on the bottom, diaphragm on the top, the front side is TVA, back side is multifidus. So in that, we have to be able to really use that entire canister, including the pelvic floor, so that the floor of our core stays up first, and then everything else can tighten and stabilize around it. So the diaphragm is just going to help us to access some of those things. And once we reach that place of stability, true stability in the core, that's when you can really then start strengthening. So those muscles are really meant to be stabilizers. So they're not meant to do big movements. They're not meant to help you necessarily like swing a bat powerfully. Those aren't our powerhouse muscles. Those are our stabilizers. So when we move outside of our powerhouse and start working on functional things to improve a golf swing, a bat swing, to be able to run, to lift heavy things, right? Then we're looking more at, when we're looking at rotational stuff, we're looking more at the oblique muscles. But for the obliques to really work appropriately, we have to be able to be stable to strengthen on top of that. So we have the obliques, internal and external, both on each side. They kind of run different directions. Some help us with same side rotation while the others are opposite side rotating. And like I said, I'll kind of continue on that in a separate video, a separate educational series, because we're going to build on this first. So on top of that, then we have our 6-pack or 8-pack for some people, and those are rectus abdominis. So those are really designed for straight flexion of our core, but again through power and strength. And on the back side, we've got QL, we have our erector spinae or the paraspinal muscles, and a few other kind of important movers back there as well. But we've got to start with the center core stability first, and diaphragm is the best way to access that. So for today, we're going to start lying on our backs. So once we get lying down, you're just going to let the knees bend comfortably so the feet are resting pretty flat. And then we're just going to put a hand on the chest and a hand on the belly. And this is really just a monitor to figure out sort of how to get the air into your diaphragm versus into your chest. When we take a deep breath in through the nose, you really want to only feel the belly hand rise and fall as you breathe in and out. And for the purposes of this, we're really just going to go in and out through the nose. It's to be sure to not expire too much air through the mouth and not enough in through the nose, so that no strange sensations come on. So we're just going to do nose breathing first. So we're going to go in, hold for about 3 or 4 seconds, and then breathe it out and let the belly fall. So we're going to practice that a few times, breathing in for about 3 or 4 seconds. And out for 3 seconds. So both directions moving slowly is called sort of a box breath, which also helps access your parasympathetic system and settle the nervous system a little bit better too. So for the purposes of this, it's mostly just to find the diaphragm, and be able to feel the belly fill. So then, after you sort of master that, we're gonna bring the hands kind of in the C-shaped part of our hands. We're gonna bring it onto the very bottom of the rib cage. So now you're gonna do the same belly breath. And depending on what your normal breath pattern is, you may or may not feel your hands move. So the next breath I want us to try to take is a breath into the belly, into the diaphragmatic space, but we're actually going to try to shift the diaphragm so that it not only pushes forward into the belly, but so that it also pushes out to the side into the rib cage. So we're getting more into that 360 breath rather than just the belly breath. So bring the hands back to the edges of the rib cage and go ahead and take a nice deep breath in. And just like anything, repetition breeds retention. The more you practice it, the better you'll get, and the more times you do it in a day, the more natural it will feel. So you may not be able to expand laterally today, and it may feel simple, like you've done this your whole life. Either way is fine. So we should be feeling some expansion outward from the rib cage, as well as still the fingers lifting as the belly comes up as well. So continue practicing that as well. And then we're going to flip over and feel how it might feel coming into the lower back as well. And the big importance of this is consistently working on only belly breathing can actually expand and create some distractive force just in the belly, while it's sort of drawing the tissue in the back. So it can kind of create this anterior tilt position for us. So those of us who are sort of already tilted this way, this may feel a little bit more challenging to access into the backside, because we're so used to just breathing here because it's easier and it's less resistive. So we're just gonna come into a child's pose position this way. And you can either hold yourself up on the arms, you could put a yoga block or something to rest your head on, either way is fine. And we're doing the same gig here, but this time when you breathe in. So now we're unweighting our back. So prior we were lying on the back, so it was hard to push air into that part of our body. But now the back is free and the legs are actually pushing some weight onto the belly, so it's gonna make it a little bit easier to shift the air into the back side of the body. So you can either place your hands back here or you can relax here, whichever way feels good for you. And we're just trying to take a deep breath in through the nose again. And you might feel it only wanting to go to your belly. And again, it might just take practice and a few repetitions, as well as the ability to relax some of those backside muscles to allow some air to get in. And sometimes for the backside, you may have to just take a deeper breath and force a little bit more air into the diaphragm until the body understands how to get it there. But same breath pattern, 3 or 4 seconds in. And 3 or 4 seconds out. So each of those positions, as you're practicing and learning to use the diaphragm, it's a good idea to spend either time-wise, you could spend about 2 to 3 minutes working on belly and then ribs and then back, or maybe just shoot for between 8 and 10 really good breaths that are successful. And the next piece of this puzzle is to come into a seated position, either on the floor like I am, or you could sit in your desk chair or something in a sturdy chair where you can be a little bit more upright without slouching back onto the couch, because that'll make it a little bit tougher. But we're gonna do the same thing here. So now you're in an upright position, which is where we spend most of our day. So from here, you're gonna bring your hands into that same place. So thumbs are monitoring where the air is going in your backside. This cuff of the hand is monitoring the ribs, and then the fingers can feel the belly as it fills up. So same thing. You're gonna settle in, relax, and then take a deep breath in through the nose. And as you work on this, something else I want you to take note of is as you breathe in and you're trying to create expansion in all 360 degrees, right? You are also gonna notice that the belly, your hands move out. And as you breathe out, your waist comes in and becomes smaller. So folks who sometimes have a tendency for what's called like backward breath or backward breathing is that when you breathe in, you may actually like suck in and your belly button might draw toward you. And then when you relax, everything kind of may like bulge out and push. So rather what we're doing now is breathing in and expanding and breathing out and shrinking. And that's how we access the true diaphragmatic muscles and how we can access some of our pelvic floor muscles and those core muscles and the deep transverse abdominis or TA muscles that connect into the backside as well. That's why this ties into back pain and core strength so directly. So again, pay attention to how you breathe on a normal basis. Do you tend to be one who sits and breathes in? Right, so that's gonna be more carbon dioxide load, but it's also gonna kind of reverse the muscles. So for you, it may take a little bit extra time to train those muscles. So let's revisit here again. Let's see if you can do it. Breathe it in deep. Expanding out into the hands, back into the back, up into the belly. And on this next one, what we're gonna try to do is breathe out. So we're gonna exhale with a little bit of force, but still through the nose for this case. And breathe out until you absolutely can't push any more air out. And as you get to that end range, I really want you to feel what happens to the musculature now underneath your fingers. Let's try that again. So for most of us, you can probably really feel some of those intercostal muscles, some of the muscles right around the rib cage. Maybe in this position, you might be able to feel some of the abdomen turn on as well. But as you exhale, some of those muscles are helping you to expire and your rib cage is drawing in and those muscles are coming tighter. So now we're gonna come back to our backside and practice that forceful exhalation. So once we get here, let's just take a breath in, into the belly, expanding in all directions. And now when you breathe out, you can do mouth or nose in this case. And I want you to blow out as far as you can, maintaining posture here. And you should feel your belly button scoop down toward the surface. Your rib cage should draw in this way. And when you relax, it can expand. So let's try that again. Take a breath in and breathe it out. And if you're having a hard time feeling muscles turn on, what I'm gonna have you do is, if you happen to have a balloon handy, that would be great, because blowing into a balloon is just like resistance training for the diaphragm. So it gives you a little bit of a resistive place to blow the air into. If you don't have a balloon handy, we can actually just use your hand and kind of make like a little beak with your fingers to give your lips a small amount of like resistance to blow the air through. So we'll try one more time. Go and take a breath in. Place the hands over. And as you blow out, you should really feel everything draw down and in, directing the rib cage so that it comes in toward itself. If still you find you're having difficulty feeling that drawing in or drawing down, you can then cross your hands over the body so that you're kind of getting your rib cage in each hand this way. And as you exhale, you're gonna kind of approximate and pull the ribs in together this way. So again, a breath in. And that just helps kind of set up your neurologic system, show your body what it's supposed to do. Again, this would be a great thing to practice a couple of times a day, not always lying flat on the back, because I know that that's hard, but transitioning into a place where you can practice that deep breath and that abdominal contraction while you're sitting in your desk chair, while you're sitting on the floor, playing with your children, whatever the case may be, where you find yourself in a seated position where you can direct a little bit of focus to your body. With the opportunity to inhale and exhale over 20,000 times a day, that's a lot of really great practice, even if you just did it 10 times an hour. So now that you have spent ample amounts of days filled with 20,000 breaths worth of practicing of this diaphragmatic contraction, pelvic floor, TVA, and getting familiar with all of those things, now we can really work on creating some strength through those stabilizers and being able to move our extremities as we're doing it. So the practice is important so that you have access to the ability to expand, and so that it becomes a more natural process before you start stacking things on top of it. So once you feel comfortable, you can feel like you can expand easily in all directions. There may still be some paths of greater resistance that you sort of have to concentrate on to push the air into those areas, and that's okay. But as long as you feel like you can easily perform the breathing, you've found those TVA, and you are able to draw the rib cage in toward itself and close down that space. That's the important thing, because that'll be the core foundation of doing everything else that comes next. So we're gonna come onto our backs again. And if you haven't warmed up that belly breath yet, go ahead and do a few of those before you begin. Otherwise, we're gonna start with a breath in and then breathing it out, getting your core contraction. And you don't want to be so contracted that your upper back feels like it has to come off the ground for you to hold the low back down. This isn't necessarily about bracing the body down. It's about drawing the belly down, pulling the rib cage in, and flattening out some of that curve. It doesn't have to be flat against the table. It doesn't have to take you fully out of what feels like a normal posture to you. So when we think about good pelvic positioning, right, some of us are tilted kind of anteriorly, and some people tend to have a sort of flatter situation this way. So you want to just maybe rock back and forth a few times and find a comfortable place of neutral. Once you find that neutral spine and pelvis, then I want you to do the breath, pull the belly down, draw the rib cage in, and find that your full spine is comfortable. So a great place to start with extremity movement with this is just to start here and try to eliminate any amount of wiggle that happens in your hips, both as you draw the leg up. You should be able to keep that belly down, keep the rib cage drawn in as the leg comes up and down. For most people, the up feels pretty easy, but the placing it back down on the ground is the harder piece. And hip range here isn't super important. It does not have to come all the way up to 90, and certainly doesn't have to come knee to chest, right? Really, we're just looking for the foot lift and lower and demonstrating control through that movement. Once you've mastered there, we can add some contralateral movement in. So again, remembering contralaterals, opposite side movement. So as the left leg comes up, you can drop the right shoulder back. Again, range of motion is not important here. You can take it any range until you feel like by taking this arm up, did you lose your contraction in this part of the rib cage? If you did, pull it back all in, get the rib cage drawn in, the belly button down, and try again, and only move through the range that you can control. And you'll switch sides and just work through that opposing movement. And maybe just set a timer for yourself so that you work on this one for about 2 minutes. If that all goes well, nothing's painful, you felt like you stabilized well, then we can actually bring the legs up into a tabletop position this way. So same idea, you're drawing the belly down, closing the rib cage. And for here, again, start low level first, so put the hands down to the floor, and you're just gonna reach with one toe, tap it down, and bring it back up. Again, we're trying to decrease wiggle. So if you find that as you're dropping it, that your space is increasing or that your sacrum is sliding around on the floor, then you may have to go back to level 1 or just readjust and try again. And again, whatever you can do, shoot for about 2 minutes or at least 10 times on each side would be a good starting place. And then again, we can add opposing and move into this dead bug. So as you drop the right leg, the left arm will come up and overhead, everything staying down and in, and then pull it all back together. And depending on where your strengths and weaknesses are, you may feel some strain in through the hip flexors and quads. You may feel difficulty in kind of the mid lower thoracic spine into the mid thoracic spine. You might feel like those muscles are slightly struggling to keep your body down depending on postural compensations. For people who spend a lot of time sort of bent over during the day, not necessarily computer posture, but people who might work more in a space like with their arms and doing a lot of like laboring work, oftentimes do struggle to reverse that thoracic spine and just don't have a lot of strength in that area. All of those sensations are normal, and just stop as your body says that you need to stop. All right, the last piece of this is gonna be same contraction, pulling it all down, and then we're just gonna take the leg, we're gonna slide it out straight and draw it back in. If you have on socks and your surface is pretty slick, you don't actually have to lift the foot up and off of the floor. And all this is doing is just challenging our TVA, obliques, pelvic floor. It's just challenging all of these things to hold together as our extremities do some flexion as we did before. Now we're working into extension and lengthening this lever arm. So it's just challenging it in different neurologic ways to prepare us for real world movement. One last exercise you can add. Once you are successful, you can add a band to this one as well. For this one, we're tightening core, and then we're just gonna drop a knee out, not so far that the pelvis rotates, but just as far as you can control that contraction, and then drive it back in and together. And again, if you're going through all of these, spend 90 seconds to 2 minutes so that you're successfully completed in less than 10 minutes. And it's just something that we can do, committing for the first like 3 to 4 weeks, committing to these exercises once a day for about 5 days out of the week would give you the opportune time to develop that stability. Keeping in mind that soft tissue and musculoskeletal development in general takes about anywhere, depending on genetics and etc., 4 to 6 weeks to really change muscular strength and development. So hopefully you start feeling stronger in the interim as you develop more control, but true strength takes time to develop. So remember, this time and consistency is super important. Happy practicing.